In the quiet suburbs of Crestwood, a young woman named Amelia believed she had finally found a life of simple, ordinary love. 6 months pregnant and deeply in love with her husband, Ethan, she endured the constant scorn of his wealthy family, who saw her as nothing more than a penniless girl from the wrong side of the tracks. They had no idea who she really was. But one cold afternoon, in the city's most exclusive baby boutique, their scorn turns into a horrifying public spectacle. What they don't know is that the woman they are trying to break is more powerful than they could ever imagine, and her secret is about to bring their entire world crashing down. Amelia Thorne traced the condensation on the kitchen window with a fingertip, a small, wistful smile on her face. Outside, the autumn leaves of Crestwood were a riot of gold and crimson, painting the quiet middle-class street in warm hues. Their 2-bedroom rented house, with its slightly creaky floorboards and a garden that was more weeds than roses, felt like a sanctuary. It was simple, it was real, and most importantly, it was a life she had chosen. A life where she was just Amelia, a former librarian, a loving wife, and soon a mother. Her husband, Ethan Thorne, walked in, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her burgeoning belly. He smelled of coffee and the crisp morning air. "What's got my 2 favorite people so captivated?" he murmured, kissing the side of her neck. "Just watching the world go by." She sighed contentedly, leaning back against his solid frame. "Thinking about how lucky I am." "I'm the lucky one," he insisted, his voice earnest. "You know that, right, despite everything." Everything was the unspoken word that hung in the air whenever they talked about his family. The Thornes were Crestwood royalty, their name synonymous with a successful regional construction empire built by Ethan's father, Robert. They lived in a sprawling mansion on the other side of town, a place of polished marble, cold gazes, and suffocating expectations. To them, Amelia was a colossal disappointment. She had no pedigree, no trust fund, and no connections that could benefit the Thorne dynasty. She was the librarian their Ivy League-educated son had inexplicably fallen for and married after a whirlwind romance. The matriarch, Beatrice Thorne, made her disdain for Amelia painfully clear. Every Sunday dinner was a trial by fire. Beatrice would comment on Amelia's simple dress sense, her lack of knowledge about the latest stock market trends, or her preference for novels over society galas. Each comment was a perfectly sharpened dart, aimed to remind Amelia that she didn't belong. "Don't let her get to you, Ames," Ethan would always say on the drive home. "She's just from a different generation. She doesn't see you like I do." But Amelia saw the way Ethan's shoulders tensed in his mother's presence, the way he'd offer a weak defense before inevitably falling silent. He loved his mother, and he was terrified of her disapproval. That fear, Amelia knew, was a chasm between them. What Ethan and his entire family didn't know was that Amelia's simple life was a meticulously crafted illusion. The name she had been born with wasn't Amelia Evans, the fabricated identity of an orphan who'd put herself through state college. Her real name was Amelia Sterling. She was the sole heir to Sterling Enterprises, a global conglomerate with holdings in technology, finance, and real estate that dwarfed the Thornes' local construction business into utter insignificance. The Thornes' mansion could fit inside the foyer of her family's New York penthouse. After her parents' tragic death in a private jet crash when she was 18, Amelia had inherited it all. But the world of corporate takeovers of sycophants and fortune hunters had felt like a prison. She'd watched friends get betrayed by people only interested in their proximity to wealth. She yearned for something genuine. So with the help of her family's most trusted advisor, the fiercely loyal Arthur Finch, she had created a new identity. She'd moved to a city where no one knew her, taken a quiet job at a library, and lived on a modest salary, determined to find someone who would love her for her heart and mind, not her bank account. And she had found Ethan. He was kind, charming, and when it was just the two of them, he made her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. She had fallen for him so deeply that she had convinced herself she could live in this fabricated world forever. Telling him the truth felt like a betrayal of the very foundation their relationship was built on. How could she explain that the financial struggles they'd argued over the broken-down car, the budget for the baby's nursery, were a complete charade on her part? He would feel like a fool, and their love, which she treasured more than any fortune, would be tainted. The ringing of her phone shattered the morning peace. The caller ID flashed Queen Beatrice. Amelia's smile tightened. Ethan saw her expression. Let it go to voicemail. She'll just keep calling, Amelia said, forcing a cheerful tone. She answered, putting the phone on speaker. Good morning, Beatrice. Amelia, I trust you're not still lazing about. Beatrice's clipped, icy voice filled the kitchen. I have decided we are going to La Petite Chérie this afternoon to select a suitable registry for the baby. My friends will expect a certain standard, and we can't have them thinking the first Thorne grandchild will be swaddled in polyester. Amelia's heart sank. La Petite Chérie was the most ostentatious, ridiculously expensive children's boutique in the city. A single pair of baby booties there cost more than their weekly grocery budget. Oh, that's very generous, Beatrice, but we were really hoping to keep things simple. We found some lovely things at a little shop downtown. Nonsense, Beatrice scoffed. You wouldn't know quality if it slapped you in the face. This is not up for debate. And I've also invited someone to help us. You remember Chloe Preston, don't you? Her taste is simply impeccable. Amelia's blood ran cold. Chloe Preston, Ethan's ex-girlfriend from college. The woman Beatrice had openly championed as the one who got away. Chloe was everything Amelia wasn't: blonde, polished from a family with a comparable if smaller fortune to the Thornes. Inviting her was not a kind gesture. It was a calculated act of cruelty. Mom, that's not appropriate. Ethan interjected, his voice firm for once. Why would you invite Chloe? Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ethan. Chloe and I are dear friends. She has wonderful insights into what a family like ours needs. It will be helpful. 2:00. Don't be late, Amelia. And for heaven's sake, try to wear something presentable. The line went dead. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Ethan turned to Amelia, his face a mixture of apology and frustration. I'm so sorry, Ames. I don't know what she's thinking. I do, Amelia said softly, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. She's thinking about how to remind me that I'll never be good enough. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. Ethan, you have to say something to her. You have to tell her to stop. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she knew meant he was stressed and conflicted. I will. Of course I will. But you know how she is. It's better to just get through it. We'll go smile, let her feel like she's in control, and then we'll come home and laugh about it. It's not worth the fight. His words, meant to be placating, felt like a small betrayal. It was always easier to appease his mother than to defend his wife. Amelia swallowed the bitter taste of disappointment. She knew she had to go. To refuse would only give Beatrice more ammunition, painting her as ungrateful and difficult. She would go, she would endure, and she would count the minutes until she could return to her simple, safe world. She had no idea that the carefully constructed walls of that world were about to be blown apart, and the storm was gathering at the gilded doors of La Petite Chérie. The air inside La Petite Chérie was thick with the scent of lavender potpourri and old money. Everything was cream gold and pastel blue. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off crystal chandeliers and illuminating displays of hand-stitched cashmere onesies and miniature velvet rocking horses. It wasn't a store. It was a museum for the children of the 1%. Amelia felt a familiar wave of unease wash over her. It wasn't the opulence that bothered her. She had grown up surrounded by far greater luxury. It was the pretense. This world which Beatrice and Chloe navigated with the effortless grace of sharks in their natural habitat felt alien and suffocating. She smoothed down her simple navy blue maternity dress, suddenly feeling frumpy and out of place, just as Beatrice had intended. Beatrice and Chloe were already there, perched on a plush settee like a pair of regal vultures sipping sparkling water from delicate flutes. Beatrice was immaculate in a Chanel tweed suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Chloe, a vision in a silk blouse and designer jeans, looked Amelia up and down with a pitying smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Amelia, darling, you made it," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We were just discussing cribs. The Versailles collection is simply to die for. Hand-carved mahogany with 24-carat gold leaf accents." She gestured towards a monstrously ornate crib that looked more like a papal throne than a place for a baby to sleep. It probably cost more than Ethan's car. "It's very grand," Amelia managed, forcing a polite smile. "But I was hoping for something a little more understated. Simpler." Chloe let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Oh, Amelia, you have to think about the optics. The first-born grandchild can't sleep in something from a chain store. It sends the wrong message." "What message is that?" Amelia asked, her voice quiet but firm. "That his parents love him for who he is, not what he's surrounded by." Beatrice's smile tightened. "The message is that his family has standards, something you seem determined to ignore." She stood up, gliding over to a rack of tiny outfits. "Now let's look at a coming-home outfit. Chloe, dear, you have such an eye for these things." For the next hour, Amelia was subjected to a masterclass in psychological warfare. Beatrice and Chloe moved through the store, picking up exorbitantly priced items and discussing them as if Amelia wasn't there. They talked about the importance of Italian leather shoes for a newborn who couldn't walk a sterling silver rattle that was a family heirloom in the making, and a stroller collaboration between a high-fashion house and a German engineering firm. Every suggestion Amelia made was immediately shot down with a condescending remark. "Oh no, dear. Cotton is so pedestrian. We need Sea Island cotton at the very least. A wooden high chair. How utterly rustic. No, it must be the transparent acrylic one, so much more chic." Ethan, who had arrived a few minutes after Amelia, stood awkwardly by the door, trying and failing to steer the conversation towards something more reasonable. "Mom, maybe we should look at the price tags," he suggested weakly at one point. "Don't be vulgar, Ethan," Beatrice snapped without looking at him. "Price is not a concern when it comes to my grandchild." Amelia felt a growing sense of isolation. She watched Ethan, hoping he would put his foot down, draw a line in the sand, and defend their right to raise their child as they saw fit. But he just fidgeted, offering placating smiles and non-committal shrugs. He was a spectator at his own wife's humiliation. The situation escalated when Chloe picked up a delicate hand-embroidered christening gown. "This is it, Beatrice. It's perfect, classic, elegant. It's the kind of thing that gets passed down through generations. It's beautiful. Beatrice agreed, her eyes gleaming. She turned to Amelia. We'll take this, of course. Amelia looked at the tag discreetly. $5,000 for an outfit a baby would wear for 2 hours. It was obscene. Beatrice, that's incredibly generous, but we can't accept that, Amelia said, her voice strained. It's far too much. Nonsense, it's a gift, Beatrice said dismissively. It's not just the money. Amelia insisted, her patience wearing thin. It's not us. We want our child to grow up with grounded values, to understand the worth of things, not just the price. Chloe scoffed, stepping closer. What would you know about values? From what I hear, your entire life has been about latching on to people with more than you. First a scholarship, then a man with a promising future. This is just the next logical step, isn't it? Securing the Thorn inheritance for your child. The accusation, so blatant and venomous, struck Amelia like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Ethan, her eyes silently screaming at him to intervene, to say something to stop this. Ethan cleared his throat. Chloe, that's out of line. It was the weakest defense imaginable. There was no anger in his voice, no outrage. It was a polite reprimand, like telling a child not to run indoors. Chloe just smirked, emboldened by his weakness. Is it? Or is it the truth everyone's thinking, but is too polite to say, Beatrice just wants to ensure her grandchild has the best of everything, something its mother clearly can't provide and doesn't appreciate? That's enough, Amelia said, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and rising anger. You know nothing about me. I know that you showed up out of nowhere and trapped a man who was destined for so much more. Chloe hissed, her voice low and menacing. You're a leech, Amelia, and sooner or later everyone is going to see it. The store had grown quiet. A sales associate hovered nervously nearby, pretending to adjust a display of baby bonnets. Beatrice watched the exchange with a look of smug satisfaction. This was exactly what she had wanted. She had orchestrated this confrontation to break Amelia, to prove to Ethan that he had made a terrible mistake. Amelia felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. She looked at her husband, the man she had given up her world, for the man who was supposed to be her partner and protector. He stood there frozen, his face pale, trapped between the woman he married and the woman who raised him. And in his silence, she felt a profound and devastating crack form in the foundation of her love. I need some air, she whispered, turning to leave. Her hands were shaking. The weight of her secret of the double life she was leading pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. All she had ever wanted was love, pure and simple. But in that moment, surrounded by a fortune that was a pittance compared to her own, she had never felt so utterly poor. The storm had not just gathered. It had broken, and she was standing in the heart of it, completely alone. As Amelia turned to walk away, her legs unsteady, Beatrice stepped forward, blocking her path. The older woman's face was a mask of cold triumph. Running away, Beatrice said, her voice loud enough for the other patrons in the boutique to hear. How typical. You can't handle a simple discussion about what's best for your own child. This isn't a discussion, Amelia retorted, her voice shaking but gaining a steely edge. This is an ambush, and I will not be a part of it. She tried to step around Beatrice, but Chloe moved to her other side, hemming her in. The two women stood like prison guards, their expensive perfumes mingling in a cloying, suffocating cloud. Don't be so dramatic, Chloe purred, picking a piece of imaginary lint from Amelia's dress. We're just trying to help you. It must be so overwhelming trying to fit into a world you're not accustomed to. All these choices, all these prices. She let the last word hang in the air, a deliberate insult. A well-dressed woman browsing nearby glanced over her expression, a mixture of curiosity and pity. The sales associates were now openly staring. Amelia felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. This was a public spectacle, and she was the main attraction. "I am perfectly capable of choosing items for my own baby," Amelia stated, her jaw tight. "And I don't need help from you." "Oh, I think you do," Chloe said, her voice turning sharp and cruel. She gestured around the store. "You walk in here in your sensible little dress, looking at things you could never possibly afford. Are you hoping that if you just stand near them long enough, some of the class will rub off? Or are you just trying to figure out which items you can pressure Ethan into buying so you can sell them later?" The accusation was so vile, so utterly baseless, that it momentarily stunned Amelia into silence. Beatrice seized the opportunity, addressing the store manager, who was now cautiously approaching. "Danielle, I do apologize for the scene. My daughter-in-law is under some strain. She's not used to this kind of environment. I'm afraid she may be feeling a little lightheaded." It was a masterful move, painting Amelia as not only poor, but emotionally unstable. Danielle, the manager, gave Amelia a nervous professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. Can I get you a glass of water, ma'am?" What she needs is a reality check. Chloe snapped, her patience for the charade gone. She snatched a glass of sparkling water from a nearby tray and, with a flick of her wrist, accidentally sloshed its contents down the front of Amelia's navy dress. The cold liquid soaked through the fabric instantly, and Amelia gasped, stumbling back. The dress, now dark and wet, clung uncomfortably to her baby bump. It was a petty juvenile act, but in the context of the public setting, it was utterly debasing. "Oh, clumsy me," Chloe exclaimed with theatrical shock, though her eyes danced with malicious glee. "I'm so sorry." "That's it," Ethan finally said, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and panic as he rushed forward. "We're leaving. Chloe, that was uncalled for." "Oh, relax, Ethan," Beatrice said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just water. It will dry. Amelia is being overly sensitive." But it wasn't just water. It was the final stinging drop in an ocean of humiliation. Amelia looked down at her ruined dress, at the smug faces of the two women who despised her, and then at her husband. He was holding out a hand to her, but his eyes were darting around the store, more concerned with the audience than with her. He wanted to defuse the situation, to escape the embarrassment. He wasn't defending her honor. He was managing a public relations crisis. In that moment, something inside Amelia, something she had been carefully protecting, finally shattered. The fantasy of their simple, perfect life evaporated, revealing the ugly truth beneath. She had made herself small and powerless for this man, and when she needed him most, he was not her shield. He was just another bystander. With a newfound, chilling calm, she ignored Ethan's outstretched hand. She looked directly at Beatrice, her voice low and steady, devoid of the tremor it held just moments before. "You have no idea what you've just done." Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh. "Is that a threat? From you, don't be ridiculous. What could you possibly do? Complain to Ethan? Cut up my credit cards for this registry." The store manager, Danielle, looking deeply uncomfortable, stepped between them. "Perhaps we should all just take a moment. I think you should be careful who you're speaking to." "Danielle," Chloe interjected, pointing a manicured finger at Amelia. "This woman is clearly unstable. For all we know, she could be trying to cause a scene to get something for free. You should probably check her bag on the way out." The suggestion that she was a potential shoplifter was the final unforgivable blow. The humiliation was complete. It burned in her cheeks and coiled like a snake in her stomach. Amelia didn't say another word. She met Ethan's panicked gaze one last time, and what he saw in her eyes made him flinch. The warmth, the adoration, the gentle love he took for granted, it was all gone. In its place was a vast, cold emptiness that mirrored the Arctic chill in her voice. She turned on her heel, her back ramrod straight. She walked past the displays of ludicrously expensive baby clothes, past the gawking customers and the nervous staff. She didn't run. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace that was more powerful than any outburst. Every head turned to watch her, this heavily pregnant woman in a soaking wet dress, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. When she reached the heavy glass doors, she pushed them open and stepped out into the bright, indifferent afternoon sunlight. She did not look back. She took out her phone, her fingers moving with unshakable purpose across the screen. She selected a number from her contacts, a name Ethan had never seen, and pressed the call button. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Arthur," she said, her voice as clear and hard as a diamond. "It's me." There was a pause on the other end, then a voice calm and deeply respectful. "Amelia, is everything all right?" "No," she replied. The city sounds of Crestwood fading into a dull hum in her ears. "I'm done. I want you to come here. Right now. And I want you to bring everything. It's time for the Thorns to learn who they've been dealing with." Less than 15 minutes later, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop in front of La Petite Chérie, its presence on the quaint, boutique-lined street as subtle as a thunderclap. The car was so profoundly out of place that it brought traffic to a near standstill. Pedestrians stopped and stared, pulling out their phones to take pictures. Back inside the boutique, the atmosphere was thick with a strange mix of residual tension and awkwardness. Beatrice and Chloe were attempting to resume their shopping, their voices artificially bright, but the energy of their victory had dissipated. Ethan stood by the window, pale and agitated repeatedly, trying to call Amelia's phone, only to be sent to voicemail each time. The store manager, Danielle, hovered nearby, unsure of what to do. The boutique's glass door swung open, and a man in his late 50s stepped inside. He was dressed in a bespoke Savile Row suit that fit him like a second skin. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture was impeccable, and he exuded an aura of quiet, unassailable authority. This was Arthur Finch, the CEO of the Sterling family office, and the man who had been Amelia's guardian mentor and fiercest protector since her parents' death. He was followed by two other individuals in similarly sharp business attire, a man and a woman who carried leather portfolios. Arthur's gaze swept across the store, coolly assessing the scene before his eyes landed on Beatrice and Chloe. He then glanced at the large dark stain on the floor, where Amelia had stood, and his expression, already stern, hardened into granite. "May I help you?" Danielle, the manager, asked, approaching him hesitantly. "I'm here to see my employer," Arthur said, his voice calm but resonant, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He walked directly towards the small group. Beatrice looked him up and down with a disdainful frown. "I believe you're mistaken. We haven't hired any new staff." Arthur ignored her completely. His eyes locked onto Ethan. "Mr. Thorne, I am Arthur Finch. I am here on behalf of my employer and your wife, Amelia Sterling." The name hung in the air, electric and foreign. Ethan just stared, his mind struggling to process the words. "Sterling, I don't understand." "Her name is Thorne." It was Evans. Evans was a name of convenience, Arthur stated flatly. A name she adopted to live a life of peace and anonymity. A life she hoped would allow her to be loved for herself, not for her name or her net worth. It appears she was tragically mistaken. Chloe let out a derisive snort. "Sterling. What is this, some kind of joke? Did she hire an actor to come and scare us?" How pathetic. Arthur turned his piercing gaze on her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Miss Chloe Preston, daughter of Edward Preston of Preston Real Estate. Your father's company is currently seeking a $60 million bridge loan from North Star Bank to finance your new condominium project, the Summit at Crestwood Heights. Is that correct?" Chloe's smug expression faltered. "How do you know that?" "I know that," Arthur said, opening his portfolio with a soft click. "Because Sterling Financial Group is the majority shareholder of North Star Bank. As of 10 minutes ago, on the authority of Ms. Sterling, your loan application has been permanently denied due to character concerns regarding your company's associates." He slid a document across the counter to her. "Here is the official notification." Chloe's face went white as a sheet. She snatched the paper, her hands trembling as she read it. Arthur then turned his attention to Beatrice, who was watching him with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Mrs. Beatrice Thorne, your husband's company." Thorne Construction was recently awarded the exclusive contract for the infrastructure development of the new Sterling Technologies corporate campus being built just outside this city. It is, I believe, the largest contract in your company's history. A company maker, I believe Robert called it. Beatrice's jaw went slack. The Sterling campus was the talk of the town, a multi-billion-dollar project that was going to transform the regional economy. That contract, Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a glacial chill, contained a standard morality clause. Given your public harassment and assault of a senior executive and principal owner of Sterling Enterprises, namely your daughter-in-law, you are in breach. The contract is hereby terminated effective immediately. All Thorne assets and personnel are to be off-site by morning. He placed another document in front of her. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the recovery of our initial mobilization payments. No, Beatrice whispered, shaking her head. No, this can't be. Oh, but it is, Arthur said. And finally, this charming little boutique, La Petite Chérie. He looked at Danielle, the manager, who seemed to have shrunk by several inches. A lovely establishment. So lovely, in fact, that Ms. Sterling's private equity firm, Sterling Capital, acquired the parent company that owns this retail chain 6 months ago. As the new beneficial owner, Miss Sterling is exercising her right to terminate your franchise agreement due to your staff's failure to ensure a safe and respectful environment for all customers. Particularly, he added with a pointed look, the owner. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Chloe's ragged breathing. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been annihilated in a nuclear blast of wealth and influence so vast it was incomprehensible. Ethan finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate sound. Where is she? Where is Amelia? Arthur looked at him with an expression of profound disappointment. She is where she should have been all along, surrounded by people who protect her, not by those who stand by and watch as she is humiliated. He turned to his associates. Please ensure all parties receive their copies, and have security escort Mrs. Thorne and Ms. Preston from the premises. They are no longer welcome here. 2 security guards who had entered discreetly behind Arthur moved forward. Beatrice looked as if she might faint. Her entire world, her social standing, her family's fortune, her legacy had been dismantled in under 5 minutes by a man she had mistaken for a chauffeur. As the guards led a protesting Chloe and a shell-shocked Beatrice out of the store, Arthur turned back to Ethan. The cold, professional mask dropped for a moment, revealing a flicker of something almost paternal. She loved you, Mr. Thorne. She gave up a world you cannot even begin to imagine just for the simple hope that your love was real. She wanted a husband, not a bodyguard. But she at least deserved an ally. And you failed her. You failed her and your unborn child. Arthur turned and walked towards the door, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of the now tainted boutique. Ethan stood alone, a receipt for his failure in his hand, surrounded by the opulent baby things he could no longer afford, his mind reeling with the name that changed everything: Amelia Sterling. He had not married a poor librarian. He had married an empress, and he had just stood by and watched as the world threw mud at her throne. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. For Ethan, the world tilted on its axis. He stumbled out of the boutique into the harsh sunlight, the name Amelia Sterling echoing in his mind like a mantra of his own stupidity. He called her again and again. Voicemail. He sent a frantic barrage of texts. Ames, please. I don't understand. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. I love you. The single grey check mark next to each message told him his number had been blocked. He drove home to their small rented house in a daze. The creaky floorboards he used to find charming now felt like a mockery. The simple furniture they'd picked out together at thrift stores seemed like props in a play where he was the only one who didn't know his lines. Her scent lingered. Yeah, lavender and old books, and it was an agonizing reminder of the woman he had lost. Every object was a testament to the lie she had lived and the truth he had been too blind to see. The worn-out sofa where they'd cuddled the chipped mugs, they drank coffee from the stack of books on her nightstand. It was all part of the Amelia Evans costume. A costume she had worn for him. His phone rang, jarring him from his stupor. It was his father, Robert Thorne. His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow, defeated. Ethan, what did you do? Dad, Don't, Robert cut him off. I just got off the phone with Arthur Finch's legal department. It's real, son. The Sterling contract is gone. They're calling in our credit lines. Her bank froze our operating accounts. We're ruined, Ethan. Decades of work gone. Because your mother couldn't be civil to your wife. Because you let it happen. The weight of his father's words crushed him. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. He had allowed his mother's petty cruelty to detonate a bomb that had vaporized his family's legacy. He spent the rest of the day in a frantic haze trying to piece things together. A quick search for Amelia Sterling opened a digital Pandora's box. There she was in photos from years ago, on the arm of her father, the legendary titan of industry David Sterling. Pictured at charity galas in Paris, ribbon-cutting ceremonies in Tokyo, and economic forums in Davos. Her face was younger, her eyes guarded, but it was unmistakably her. The articles called her the vanished heiress, the billion-dollar ghost, speculating for years about where she had gone after her parents' death. She hadn't vanished. She had been hiding in plain sight with him. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Chloe were experiencing their own personal apocalypses. Beatrice arrived home to find her husband, Robert, a man she had dominated for 30 years, looking at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. The shouting match that ensued was legendary, its echoes felt by the household staff, who suddenly began polishing their resumes. The foundation of their marriage, built on wealth and social status, crumbled now that both were gone. For Chloe, the humiliation was more public. The news of her father's loan denial spread through the tight-knit real estate community like wildfire. The Summit project, her pet endeavor, was dead on arrival. Her father, a proud and ruthless businessman, was apoplectic. The phone call she received from him was not one of fatherly concern, but of cold commercial fury. She had cost him a fortune and made an enemy of a financial power he didn't even know was in the game. Her social standing, propped up by the illusion of influence, evaporated overnight. Friends stopped answering her calls. Party invitations were rescinded. She was a pariah. The story, as it always does in wealthy circles, began to leak. Whispers turned into gossip, and gossip turned into a full-blown scandal. The tale of how Beatrice Thorne and Chloe Preston had publicly humiliated a pregnant woman in a baby boutique, only to discover she was the secret billionaire who owned the store. The bank and the contract that kept their families afloat was too delicious not to share. The Thornes became a laughingstock, a cautionary tale whispered over champagne and canapés at the country club they would soon no longer be able to afford. That evening, consumed by a desperate soul-crushing guilt, Ethan drove to his parents' mansion. He found his mother sitting alone in the cavernous living room, a glass of untouched brandy in her hand, staring blankly at the dark fireplace. "He's going to leave me," she said, her voice brittle. "Your father, after 40 years, he said I've destroyed everything." Ethan felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Amelia's face in the boutique. "You did, Mum," he said, his own voice hollow. "You destroyed it. You pushed and you bullied and you tormented the kindest, most gentle person I have ever known. For what? Because she wasn't rich enough for you." Beatrice looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a venomous fury. She lied to us. She deceived all of us. She played us for fools. No. Ethan yelled, his control finally snapping. She wasn't playing us. She was testing us. She gave up everything to see if someone could love her for who she was, not for what she had. She gave me that chance, and I failed. But you couldn't stand the thought of her being happy. You had to tear her down, because she wasn't from your world. The irony is, her world is so far above yours, you can't even comprehend it. You were a bug trying to insult a star. He sank into a chair opposite her, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a vast, empty sorrow. "I love her, Mom. I love her so much, and I let this happen. I stood there, and I let you and Chloe tear her apart. And now she's gone. I've lost her. I've lost my child." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His child, a son or daughter who would be born into a world of unimaginable privilege, a world he was no longer a part of, a child who would know him only as the man who failed their mother. The reckoning was not just financial, it was moral. Ethan Thorne finally understood the true nature of his weakness. It wasn't just about his fear of his mother. It was a fundamental flaw in his own character. He had valued peace over principle, comfort over courage. He had loved Amelia, yes, but he had not cherished her. He had not protected her, and in the world of the truly powerful, a world, Amelia Sterling inhabited, such failures were not easily forgiven. He had lost his wife, his family's fortune, and his self-respect in a single afternoon. The price of his silence had been everything. While the Thorne family's world imploded, Amelia Sterling's world was being meticulously reassembled. She wasn't at one of her family's sprawling estates in the Hamptons or a secluded villa in Lake Como. She was in a place that felt more like home than any of them, the penthouse apartment atop the Sterling Enterprises headquarters in downtown Crestwood, a sleek tower of glass and steel that she had commissioned herself. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all clean lines, neutral colors, and breathtaking panoramic views of the city. Yet it felt sterile, impersonal. It was a fortress, not a home. For the first few days, Amelia did very little. She ate the meals her private chef prepared. She listened to the updates from Arthur about the swift and total dismantling of the Thornes' financial standing, and she spent hours sitting by the window, one hand on her belly, watching the tiny cars move along the streets below. She didn't feel triumph or vindication. She felt a profound, aching emptiness. The simple life she had craved had been a beautiful dream, but the ending was a nightmare. The man she loved had failed her in the most fundamental way. The revelation of her identity wasn't a gotcha moment. It was the tragic admission of a failed experiment. She had wanted to be loved for herself, and the test results were in she wasn't. Or at least her husband's love wasn't strong enough to withstand the slightest pressure. On the fourth day, Arthur Finch found her in the expansive home office, staring at a blank computer screen. "The Thorne accounts are settled," he said gently. "We've left them with the mansion and a modest pension for Robert. They won't starve, but their influence is gone." Amelia nodded, not looking at him. "And Ethan? He has been trying to reach you through every conceivable channel. He's left messages with my office, with the legal team, even with the building's concierge. They are remorseful. Remorse is easy when you've lost everything," she said, her voice flat. "It's courage that's hard." Arthur stood there for a moment, his posture softening. "Amelia, what he did was unforgivable. But you loved him. This pain you're feeling, locking yourself away, will not make it disappear." "I'm not locking myself away," she said, finally, turning to look at him. For the first time in days, there was a spark in her eyes, not of joy, but of resolve. "I'm preparing. I'm about to be a single mother. I am the head of a global corporation. I don't have the luxury of falling apart." From that day on, a change came over her. She stopped grieving for the life she had lost and started building a new one. She summoned her top executives, men and women, who hadn't seen her in person for over 2 years. When she walked into the boardroom, her pregnancy evident beneath a tailored but comfortable dress, a hush fell over the room. They saw the same brilliant mind they remembered, but there was a new hardness in her eyes, a new economy in her words. This was not the vanished heiress. This was the queen returned to claim her throne. She delved into the company's projects with a ferocious intensity. She reviewed quarterly reports, challenged development strategies, and made decisions with a clarity and speed that left her board members breathless. She was particularly focused on the Sterling Foundation, the company's charitable arm. She tripled its funding, directing a massive new initiative to build and support shelters for single mothers and victims of domestic abuse. She poured her pain into purpose. Ethan, meanwhile, was living in his own personal hell. He had moved out of their rented house, unable to bear the memories, and was staying in a small, soulless corporate apartment his father had kept. He wrote letters to Amelia every day, long, rambling pages filled with apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas for a second chance. He knew she would never receive them, but he had to write them. He tried to understand her. He thought about the sacrifices she had made. She who could have anything in the world had chosen to live in a drafty house, to worry about grocery bills, to wear a simple dress from a department store. She had done it all for him, for the chance at a normal life. And he had repaid her by allowing his mother and his ex-girlfriend to humiliate her over the price of a baby blanket. The shame was a physical thing, a constant weight in his chest. Realizing that apologies were meaningless without action, he started to change his life. He refused any further financial help from his father. He sold his expensive car, the one his mother had bought him as a graduation present. He took the menial entry-level job at a rival construction company that his father's now tarnished name could get him a site assistant, fetching coffee and running blueprints. The work was hard, the pay was low, and his new colleagues looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. But for the first time in his life, he was earning his own way. He was becoming the man he should have been all along. One evening, after a grueling 10-hour shift, he saw a news report on the TV in a bar. It was a local feature on a surprise visit to a new women's shelter downtown. The benefactor was making an appearance. And then she was on the screen. It was Amelia. She looked regal, confident, and breathtakingly beautiful. She moved with a purpose and grace that stole the air from his lungs. She was speaking to a group of women, her hand resting on her stomach, and she was smiling. It was a real smile, one he hadn't seen in so long. "Every person deserves a safe space," she was saying to the reporter. "A place where they are protected, valued, and given the strength to build a new future for themselves and their children. Strength isn't about how much you have. It's about what you do when you have nothing left." Watching her, Ethan finally understood. Amelia wasn't a damsel in distress waiting to be rescued. Her strength wasn't in her billions. It was in her character, the very thing he had failed to show. She was building a new world for herself and their child, a world founded on real strength and purpose. And if he ever wanted to be a part of it, even on the outermost fringes, he couldn't just say he was sorry. He would have to become a man worthy of her. The path to redemption was long, and he had only just taken the first step. 3 months passed. The seasons turned, and the chill of autumn gave way to the crisp, cold air of winter. Crestwood was decorated for the holidays. But for Ethan, there was no cheer. His life had found a new, monotonous rhythm wake before dawn work, a physically demanding job, come home to an empty apartment, and write another letter to Amelia that he knew she would never read. He had lost weight, and his hands, once soft from an office job, were now calloused and rough. He was tired, but it was a clean kind of tired. For the first time, he felt like he was building something real, even if it was just a small piece of his own shattered self-respect. He kept track of Amelia through the news. He saw the announcements from the Sterling Foundation, the glowing profiles in business magazines, hailing her return as a visionary leader. Every image of her poised and powerful was a knife to his heart. She was thriving not in spite of him, but in his absence. He was a footnote in her story. His chance, when it came, was not one he sought. One Saturday, he was volunteering with a crew from his new job, helping to do some pro bono repair work at the very women's shelter Amelia had opened. He was on a ladder, patching a section of drywall, when a familiar black Rolls-Royce pulled up outside. His heart hammered against his ribs. Amelia stepped out of the car, followed by Arthur Finch. She was heavily pregnant now, her due date clearly approaching. She wore a simple but elegant cashmere coat, and she moved with the slow, careful grace of late pregnancy. She hadn't seen him. He almost scrambled down the ladder to hide, but something stopped him. Hiding was what the old Ethan would have done. He stayed where he was, his heart pounding, and continued his work. He could hear her voice as she toured the facility, her tone warm and engaged as she spoke with the shelter's director. Eventually, her tour brought her to the hallway where he was working. "And the repairs on this wing are coming along wonderfully," the director was saying. "A local construction company has been donating their time on weekends. Their men work incredibly hard." Amelia stopped, her eyes scanning the work, and then she saw him. Their gazes locked across the hallway. For a long moment, the world seemed to stop. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then something unreadable. Not anger, not pity, but a deep, quiet watchfulness. He looked a mess. He was covered in drywall dust, his hair was matted with sweat, and his clothes were spattered with paint. He looked nothing like the polished man she had married. He slowly climbed down the ladder, his heart in his throat. Arthur Finch took a half step forward, his hand instinctively moving as if to shield her, but Amelia subtly raised a hand to stop him. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was calm, neutral. "Amelia," he croaked, his own voice raspy. I didn't know you would be here. This is one of my projects. I visit often," she replied. She looked at his hands, at his work clothes. "The director tells me you're a volunteer." "My company is," he clarified. "I'm just one of the crew. It's a good place. They do important work." The small talk felt absurd, like two strangers making conversation in an elevator. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. He had 1,000 things to say, 1,000 apologies rehearsed in the lonely darkness of his apartment. But looking at her now, so serene and self-possessed, words felt cheap and inadequate. So instead of speaking, he reached into the back pocket of his dusty jeans and pulled out a worn, slightly crumpled envelope. It was the first letter he had written, the one he had carried with him every day, like a penance. He held it out to her. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect anything. But I needed you to have it. It says everything I was too weak and too stupid to say before." She looked at the envelope, then back at his face. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the genuine remorse etched into the new lines around them. She saw a man who had been stripped of his privilege and had not, to her surprise, crumbled. Slowly she reached out and took the envelope. Her fingers brushed his, and the brief contact sent a jolt through him. "The baby is due in 3 weeks," she said softly, changing the subject. "It's a girl." Tears sprang to Ethan's eyes, and he hastily wiped them away with a dusty hand. "A girl," he whispered. Is she healthy?" "She's strong," Amelia said, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "Like her mother." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation back into her life. But it was something. It was a door, once slammed shut and bolted, being cracked open just a sliver. "I want her to have a father, Ethan." Amelia continued, her gaze unwavering. "But she needs a father who is a good man. A strong man. Not a man who is afraid of his mother or of what people think. A man who stands up for what is right, no matter how hard it is." "I'm trying," he said, his voice breaking. "Amelia, I swear I am trying to be that man." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "I'll read your letter," she said. She turned to Arthur. "We should go." As she walked away, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, watching her go. He hadn't gotten his wife back. He hadn't fixed the damage he had done. But he had been seen. She had seen his effort. And for the first time in months, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to take root in the barren wasteland of his heart. The road ahead was uncertain. A shared love had been shattered by a terrible betrayal. But now, with the impending arrival of their daughter, there was a reason to build something new from the wreckage. Not a return to the past, but a new beginning, founded not on a beautiful lie, but on a difficult, hard-earned truth. It would be a future built on her terms, guided by her strength, and he knew with every fiber of his being that he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. That afternoon wasn't a fairy tale ending, but the start of a new, more honest chapter. Ethan's journey was far from over, and Amelia's trust was not something easily won back. But with a child on the way, their story was no longer just about them. It became a story of redemption, of earning a place in his daughter's life, and of proving that a person can truly change. Amelia, now a powerful leader and a soon-to-be mother, would navigate this new path with the same strength and grace she had shown all along, building a future on her own terms. What do you think? Can someone who has failed so spectacularly ever truly redeem themselves? Can trust once so completely broken ever be rebuilt? This story is a reminder that our true character isn't shown in our best moments, but in how we react when we are at our worst. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful comeback story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below and let us know if you think Ethan deserves a second chance. The torrential downpour outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside the Sterling mansion. One moment, Isabella Sterling was cradling her stomach, dreaming of the nursery she'd designed. The next, she was staring at a set of glossy photographs her husband Nathaniel had just thrown on the marble coffee table. They showed her in a seemingly compromising position with a man she'd never met. It was a lie, a cruel, impossible lie, and yet the venom in her mother-in-law's eyes and the chilling emptiness in her husband's confirmed her fate. Before she could even process the betrayal, the heavy oak doors of the life she knew were slammed shut behind her, leaving her pregnant, penniless, and alone in the unforgiving night. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot about the one man more powerful than all of them, her billionaire father-in-law, Richard Sterling. And he was about to find out everything. The air in the grand drawing room of the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was thick with the scent of lilies and betrayal. The lilies, funereal and white, were Genevieve Sterling's favorite. The betrayal was a new addition to the decor. Isabella Rossi Sterling stood on the Aubusson carpet, the plush wool a cruel mockery of comfort beneath her trembling feet. The silk of her maternity blouse, once a soft caress, now felt like a shroud. Her hand instinctively went to the gentle curve of her belly, a silent promise to the tiny life within, that she would protect them, even as her own world was being systematically demolished. Across from her, her husband of 2 years, Nathaniel Sterling, wouldn't meet her gaze. His handsome face, usually so quick to smile, was a mask of strained indifference. His attention was fixed on the damning photographs scattered across the polished surface of a Louis XV coffee table. They were expertly crafted forgeries, showing Isabella in an intimate cafe setting with a man whose face was artfully obscured, his hand resting on hers. A private moment that never happened. A lie spun from pixels and malice. The architect of this destruction, Genevieve Sterling, stood beside her son, a vision in Chanel tweed and icy condescension. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet, unyielding and severe, much like the woman herself. Her eyes the same cold grey as a winter sky raked over Isabella with undisguised contempt. "I knew it from the start." Genevieve began, her voice a low, cultured hiss that cut deeper than any shout. "I told you, Nathaniel. Blood will always out. You can't turn a little museum curator from Brooklyn into a Sterling. She has no breeding, no integrity." "Genevieve, please," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. "Nathaniel, look at me. You know me. This isn't real. Someone did this to us." Nathaniel finally lifted his head. The conflict in his eyes was agonizing to watch. He was a man caught between the woman he professed to love and the mother whose approval he had craved his entire life. But weakness, Isabella was learning, was a far more corrosive acid than outright evil. "They are dated, Bella," he said, his voice hollow. "From last month, while I was in Singapore. My mother's investigator has phone records too. A man named... It doesn't matter. How could you? There is no man." Isabella's voice rose, laced with a desperation that only seemed to confirm her guilt in their eyes. "I was at the Met planning the new exhibit. I was attending prenatal appointments. I was here waiting for you. This is a lie." Genevieve let out a delicate, theatrical scoff. "Oh, the drama. And to think you're carrying a child. Are you even certain it's Nathaniel's, or does it belong to your accomplice?" The accusation struck Isabella with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at Nathaniel, pleading with her eyes for him to defend her, to defend their child. He just shook his head, a gesture of pathetic surrender. In that moment, the love she thought they shared evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard stone of realization in her gut. He was not her partner. He was his mother's son. "I want her out of my house," Genevieve declared, turning to Nathaniel as if Isabella were no longer in the room. "Now, with nothing but the clothes on her back. We will have our lawyers draft a quiet annulment, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll be generous, of course, provided she signs a non-disclosure agreement and disappears." "Wait," Isabella stammered, her mind racing. "My things, my purse, my phone." Genevieve smiled, a tight, cruel stretching of her lips. "Your privileges have been revoked. The Sterling legal team will handle the disposition of your effects. You will be escorted from the premises." She pressed a small, discreet button on the wall. Within seconds, 2 burly security guards in dark suits entered the room, their faces impassive. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Isabella's shock. "Nathaniel, don't let her do this. This is our home. This is our baby." He flinched at the word baby, the only flicker of humanity he'd shown. But it was fleeting. He looked away toward the rain-lashed windows. "It's for the best, Bella. My mother, she knows what's right for the family." "The family?" Isabella's voice dripped with a sudden icy calm. The desperation was gone, replaced by a clarity born of absolute betrayal. "Or the Sterling brand, the Sterling fortune." The guards flanking her now gently took her arms. The touch was professional, but it felt like a violation. She didn't resist. She walked with a dignity she didn't know she possessed, her head held high. As they passed Nathaniel, she stopped and looked directly at him, forcing him to meet her gaze one last time. "I will never forget this, Nathaniel," she said, her voice low and steady. "And one day you will have to explain to your child why You let your mother throw their pregnant mother out into a storm based on a lie." He had no response. He just stood there, a hollow man in a gilded cage. The heavy front doors swung open, revealing a night ripped apart by wind and rain. The manicured lawns of the estate were shrouded in a churning darkness. One of the guards held an umbrella, a perfunctory gesture of courtesy that was almost insulting. He walked her down the sweeping stone steps to the edge of the long, winding driveway. "A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a hotel for the night," he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable. Isabella shook her head. She knew what that meant. A hotel chosen by Genevieve. A gilded prison where she would be watched, managed, and forced to sign away her life. "No, thank you," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I'll find my own way." Before the guard could protest, she turned and started walking. The rain immediately plastered her silk blouse to her skin, the cold seeping into her bones. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face. Each step down the long private road, away from the mocking lights of the mansion, was an act of sheer will. She had no phone, no wallet, no plan. All she had was the fierce, primal instinct to protect the life growing inside her, and a burning, righteous anger that was quickly becoming the only thing keeping her warm. The gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead, a black iron portcullis marking the border between a life of luxurious lies and a future of terrifying unknown truth. And as she passed through them, a sob finally escaped her lips, lost in the howling of the wind. She was free, but she had never felt more alone. The walk from the Sterling estate to the main road felt like a pilgrimage through purgatory. Each squelch of her soaked designer flats on the asphalt was a reminder of the life she had just lost. The manicured hedges and ancient oak trees that lined the private drive, once symbols of sanctuary and permanence, now seemed like silent, judgmental sentinels. By the time Isabella reached the main road, she was drenched, shivering, and utterly disoriented. The passing headlights of cars cut through the deluge, illuminating her for a brief, startling moment, a ghost of a woman in a ruined silk blouse standing on the edge of nowhere. For a terrifying hour, she walked her mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. The initial adrenaline had worn off, leaving a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the rain. How could Nathaniel believe it? How could the man who had whispered promises of forever in her ear just last week now look at her with such cold suspicion? And Genevieve. Isabella had always known her mother-in-law was difficult, that she saw Isabella as an inadequate addition to her perfect dynasty. But she had never imagined this level of calculated cruelty. To fabricate evidence to poison her own son's mind, to cast out his pregnant wife without a shred of compassion. It was monstrous. Her feet were raw, her body ached, but one thought propelled her forward. Chloe. Chloe Davis was her opposite in almost every way. Where Isabella was thoughtful and measured, Chloe was a firecracker of righteous indignation and fierce loyalty. A tenacious journalist for an online investigative news outlet, Chloe lived in a cramped but vibrant fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a universe away from the sterile opulence of Greenwich. They had been friends since their scholarship days at Columbia, a bond forged over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. Hitching a ride was out of the question. Flagging down a taxi without a penny to her name was impossible. Her only hope was the train station a few miles away. She remembered seeing it once on a drive with Nathaniel. She focused on the memory, using it as a beacon. When she finally stumbled onto the platform, she must have looked like a wraith. A sympathetic station agent, a kind-faced woman named Martha, saw her shivering form and took pity on her. Honey, are you all right? You look like you've been through a war. Isabella, her teeth chattering, could barely form the words. I was robbed. They took everything. My purse, my phone. I just need to get to Astoria. It wasn't a complete lie. She had been robbed, just not in the way the woman imagined. Martha's expression softened. She looked at Isabella's belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. Without a word, she slid a ticket through the window. "On the house," she said quietly. "You go get yourself somewhere warm and safe." The simple act of kindness was so overwhelming that Isabella burst into tears, mumbling her thanks before hurrying onto the waiting train. The warmth of the carriage was a blessing. She huddled in a corner seat, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to become invisible as the train rattled its way toward the city. It was past midnight when she finally stood outside Chloe's apartment building. She pressed the buzzer for 4B, praying her friend was home. A moment later, a crackly voice answered. "Yeah, who is it?" "Chloe, it's me. It's Isabella." The silence on the other end was heavy with confusion. "Bella, what's wrong? You sound awful. Can you just let me in? Please." The lock buzzed immediately. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and began the slow, arduous climb up 4 flights of stairs. Each step was a monumental effort. When she reached the landing, Chloe's door was already open. Her friend stood there in faded sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her usually sharp features clouded with worry. The sight of Chloe's familiar, concerned face was the final crack in Isabella's crumbling composure. A choked sob escaped her, and she practically fell into her friend's arms. "Whoa, Bella. Hey, you're okay. I've got at you," Chloe murmured, guiding her inside and shutting the door against the world. She led Isabella to the worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped her in a thick fleece blanket, and immediately put a kettle on the stove. "Talk to me," Chloe said, her journalist's instincts kicking in, but tempered with deep affection. "What the hell happened? Where's Nathaniel? You're soaking wet and freezing." Between shivering fits and ragged breaths, Isabella told her everything. The setup, the faked photographs, Genevieve's venomous accusations, Nathaniel's spineless betrayal, being thrown out into the storm with nothing. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to disbelief, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. "That absolute witch!" Chloe seethed, pacing the small living rooms like a caged tigress. "And Nathaniel, that gutless, silver-spooned coward. I swear to God. Bella, I will end them. I will write an exposé that will strip the paint from their multi-million-dollar walls." "It's not about revenge right now, Chloe," Isabella whispered, sipping the hot tea Chloe had pressed into her hands. The warmth was slowly chasing the chill from her body. "I don't know what to do. I have nothing. They control everything. The accounts were all joint, but I never had direct access. They'll paint me as an unhinged, cheating gold digger." Chloe stopped pacing and knelt in front of Isabella, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, we're not going to let that happen. First things first, you are safe here. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Tomorrow we get you to a doctor to make sure you and the baby are okay. Then we start fighting back." She took Isabella's hands. "You are not the timid little mouse Genevieve thinks you are. You are one of the smartest women I know. You're strong, and you're a mother now. They didn't just kick you out, Bella. They declared war on your child. and they have no idea who they're messing with. For the first time all night, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within Isabella. Huddled in Chloe's tiny, cluttered, book-filled apartment, wrapped in a second-hand blanket, she felt more secure than she ever had in the cold, cavernous rooms of the Sterling mansion. The gilded cage had shattered, but here in this haven built on genuine friendship, she could start to gather the pieces. The fight wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't be fighting it alone. And she was fighting for more than just herself now. She was fighting for the small, innocent life that depended entirely on her. The storm outside was beginning to subside. The storm inside Isabella, however, was just starting to gather its strength. Thousands of miles away in the penthouse suite of the Park Hyatt Tokyo, Richard Sterling closed a deal worth 9 figures with a brisk handshake and a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 65, Richard was a titan of industry, the architect of the Sterling global logistics empire. He was a man of cold logic, ruthless efficiency, and immense understated power. He moved through the world with the quiet confidence of a man who owned most of it. His personal life was something he'd largely outsourced to his wife, Genevieve. He provided the vast resources, and she curated their social standing, managed the households, and raised their son. He trusted her judgment in these matters implicitly, not out of deep emotional connection, but out of a CEO's faith in a long-serving, reliable department head. He'd met Isabella a handful of times. She was pretty quiet and seemed to make Nathaniel happy. Richard didn't deal in happiness. He dealt in assets and liabilities. Isabella seemed like a neutral asset. She didn't come from money or influence, which was a minor liability in Genevieve's eyes, but she was educated and discreet, which Richard appreciated. He had bigger things to worry about than his son's domestic arrangements. The call from Genevieve came as he was overlooking the glittering expanse of Tokyo. Her voice was strained, crafted to sound mournful. "Richard, something dreadful has happened," she said. "It's Isabella." He listened without interruption as she spun her carefully edited tale. Isabella had been unfaithful. There was irrefutable proof. A terrible, sordid affair. Nathaniel was devastated, of course. For the good of the family, to avoid a scandal, they had to act quickly. Isabella had been sent away with a generous settlement offer, pending to handle things quietly. Richard felt a stab of annoyance. Not at Isabella's supposed infidelity. He was too pragmatic to be shocked by such things, but at the messiness of it all. "Did you handle it cleanly?" He asked, his tone all business. "No chance of this hitting the press." "Of course, darling," Genevieve assured him. "I have it all under control. I'm focusing on helping Nathaniel through this difficult time." "Good," Richard said, already dismissing it. "I'll be back in 2 days. Keep it quiet." He hung up and turned his attention back to his quarterly reports. The matter, as far as he was concerned, was closed. But 24 hours later, another message arrived. It wasn't a call or an official email. It was an encrypted text message to his private unlisted phone, a number known to only 5 people in the world. The sender was anonymous. The message was short and chillingly direct. They lied. "She is pregnant with your grandchild. They threw her out in a storm with nothing. Ask your head of household staff, Mrs. Davies." She saw everything. Richard Sterling stared at the message, his blood running cold. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, changing the entire equation. An affair was a messy inconvenience. A pregnant daughter-in-law cast out into the street was a different matter entirely. It was a matter of legacy. Of blood. He dismissed the possibility of a prank. No one had this number. This was a calculated move. And it had worked. A seed of doubt, hard and sharp, was planted in his mind. He trusted Genevieve's management of their social lives, but he had never mistaken her for a sentimentalist. Her ambition for the Sterling name was a cold, hard thing. Was it cold enough to do this? His next call was not to Genevieve or Nathaniel. It was to Alistair Finch, the head of his personal security detail for 30 years. Finch was a former MI6 agent, a man of absolute discretion and formidable capability. "Alistair," Richard said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "I have a delicate and urgent matter. I need you to conduct a quiet investigation at the Greenwich estate. I want you to speak with the head housekeeper, Eleanor Davies. Discreetly. I want to know the exact circumstances under which my daughter-in-law Isabella left the property 2 nights ago. I want to know her current whereabouts, and most importantly, I need you to verify something for me. I need to know if she is pregnant." "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling," Finch replied, his voice a calm, professional baritone. There was no surprise, no questions, just execution. The second call was to his legal team. "Pull every document related to Nathaniel's prenuptial agreement with Isabella Rossi," he commanded. "And I want a full independent audit of every expense Genevieve has charged to the household accounts for the last 6 months. I want it on my desk by the time I land." For the rest of the day, Richard went through the motions of his business meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying his brief interactions with Isabella. She had always seemed genuine, a little intimidated by their world, perhaps, but her eyes were clear and direct. He remembered her excitement when talking about a medieval art exhibit she was helping to curate. It was a passion that couldn't be faked. He compared that image with the venom in Genevieve's voice over the phone. A discrepancy. Richard Sterling had built his empire by noticing and exploiting discrepancies. The flight back to New York on his private Gulfstream was tense. He didn't sleep. He stared out of the window at the endless carpet of clouds below, a silent fury building within him. If this was true, it wasn't just a family squabble. It was a profound betrayal of his own code. The Sterlings did not prey on the weak. They did not harm women and children. They were predators in the boardroom, yes, but they were supposed to be patricians in their own home. Genevieve's obsession with social status had, he feared, curdled into something ugly and cruel. And Nathaniel. His son's weakness was a constant source of disappointment. If he had allowed this to happen, he was not the man Richard had hoped to one day leave his empire to. When the jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, Alistair Finch was waiting on the tarmac beside the black sedan. He opened the door for Richard, his face an unreadable mask. "Well?" Richard asked as the car pulled silently away. Finch didn't waste words. He handed Richard a slim folder. "Mrs. Davies confirms your wife's account of the confrontation, but her personal observation was that Mrs. Sterling seemed distraught and genuinely confused, not guilty. She was forced to leave without any personal belongings. The security guards on duty confirm she was left on the main road in the middle of the storm. As for her location, she is currently staying with a friend, a Ms. Chloe Davis in Queens." He paused, letting the information sink in before delivering the final crucial piece. "And, sir, I had a trusted medical contact discreetly check with her OB-GYN. Isabella Sterling is indeed 16 weeks pregnant. The paternity was confirmed via a non-invasive prenatal test 6 weeks ago. The father is with 99.9% certainty your son." Richard Sterling closed his eyes. The quiet hum of the luxury car's engine was the only sound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him. The lion had been sleeping content to let others manage his domain. But now he was awake, and he was hungry. "Change of destination, Alistair," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "We're not going to Greenwich. We're going to the city office. It's time to restructure the family." Richard Sterling's Manhattan office, occupying the entire top floor of the Sterling Tower, was a monument to power. It was sleek, minimalist, and offered a panoramic view of the city he had in many ways conquered. But Richard wasn't interested in the view. He sat behind his vast obsidian desk, the slim folder from Alistair Finch lying open before him. On his screen was the household audit he had requested. The numbers told a story of their own, a series of large, unusual payments to a private investigation firm he'd never heard of. Another substantial payment to a digital forensics specialist based out of a shady downtown office. It was a breadcrumb trail of deceit, and Genevieve hadn't been clever enough to hide it from a man who could financially dissect a corporation in his sleep. He summoned his son. Nathaniel arrived an hour later, looking flustered. He likely expected a debrief about the Tokyo trip, perhaps a perfunctory question about the unpleasantness with Isabella. He walked in with a practiced air of weary filial duty. "Father," he began, "welcome back. I trust the trip was successful." Richard didn't answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. "I imagine Mother filled you in on the situation with your pregnant wife." Richard interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. Nathaniel froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt under the office's cool lighting. I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Richard slid one of the faked photographs across the desk. "Your mother presented you with these, I believe." Nathaniel nodded dumbly. Richard then slid a second piece of paper across the desk. It was the report from Alistair Finch, with a single line highlighted the confirmation of the positive prenatal paternity test. "And I assume you had seen this as well." "Weeks ago," Richard stated. It was not a question. Nathaniel's composure shattered. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. "Father, I can explain. Mother was so certain. The investigator. The pictures looked so real. She said Isabella was trying to trap us, that the baby might not even be mine." His voice trailed off into a pathetic mumble. The excuses of a child caught in a lie. Richard leaned forward, his grey eyes pinning his son in place. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling, profound disappointment that was infinitely worse. She said the investigator said, "Do you have a mind of your own, Nathaniel, or is it merely a repository for your mother's ambitions and suspicions? Did you ask your wife? Did you look the woman carrying your child in the eye and give her the benefit of a single doubt?" "I was confused," Nathaniel whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You were a coward," Richard corrected him, the words sharp as shards of glass. "You stood by while your mother, my wife, executed a character assassination of the most vulgar and cruel kind. You let her throw your pregnant wife out of her home with nothing. Not a phone to call for help, not $1 for a cab. In a storm. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the leader I'm supposed to entrust a global enterprise to, a man who cannot even manage the affairs of his own house with a shred of decency or courage?" Every word was a hammer blow to Nathaniel's already crumbling ego. He had no defense. There was nothing to say. Richard leaned back, his decision made. "This is what happens now. You will be suspended from your duties as COO effective immediately. Your corporate accounts will be frozen. Your access to the company jet and vehicles is revoked. You will vacate the Greenwich house by the end of the day. You can stay at the city apartment for now." We will speak again when I decide you've remembered what it means to be a man." "Father, no," Nathaniel pleaded, jolted into action. "The board, my reputation. You should have thought of your reputation when you abdicated your role as a husband and a father," Richard retorted coldly. "Get out of my office." Defeated Nathaniel rose and walked out, his shoulders slumped. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Richard alone once more. He took no pleasure in his son's humiliation, only a deep, weary sadness. The boy was broken-molded by Genevieve into a weak-willed accessory for her social climbing. Now for the Queen herself. He returned to the Greenwich estate that evening. The house felt different, tainted. Genevieve was in the drawing room, arranging flowers, humming softly to herself. She had re-established her domain. Standing near the fireplace, looking perfectly at home, was a striking brunette woman whom Richard vaguely recognized from society pages. "Richard, darling, you're home," Genevieve greeted him, smiling brightly. "You remember Victoria Vance, don't you?" She was just stopping by to offer her support to Nathaniel. "Such a dear." Victoria offered a polite, predatory smile. "Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was just telling Genevieve how sorry I was to hear of Nathaniel's troubles." Richard ignored her completely. His gaze was locked on his wife. "Miss Vance, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my wife privately." His tone left no room for argument. Victoria Vance, sensing the shift in temperature, quickly made her excuses and departed. The moment she was gone, Genevieve's smile faltered. "Richard, what's wrong? You're being rude." "Save it, Genevieve," he said, his voice flat. He tossed the folder from Finch onto the coffee table, right where the faked photos had been. "It's all in there. The payments to the PI, the digital artist you hired, the lies you told me, the lies you told our son." Genevieve's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "But I think what disgusts me most," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that you knew she was pregnant. You knew, and you did it anyway. You were willing to orphan my grandchild before he was even born, all for what? To replace a daughter-in-law you deemed unsuitable with that vacuous socialite who just left to preserve your pathetic illusion of a perfect bloodline." He walked over to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "You have mistaken my delegation for apathy for far too long, Genevieve. You have managed my homes, but you do not manage my family. You do not dictate my legacy. And you most certainly do not threaten my blood. I did it for us, for this family." She finally choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "She was an outsider, a nobody. She wasn't right for us. You did it for you." Richard corrected her, turning back to face her. His expression was utterly devoid of warmth. "And in doing so, you have fractured this family in a way you cannot possibly comprehend. You have shown me a capacity for cruelty I can no longer abide under my roof. I will be meeting with my lawyers tomorrow. This marriage, as far as I am concerned, is over." The finality in his voice was absolute. Genevieve Sterling, the untouchable queen of society, the matriarch of the Sterling dynasty, finally understood. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had picked a fight with the one person in her world who had the power to take everything away from her, and she had lost. Richard Sterling's revenge was never going to be a loud theatrical affair. He was a man who moved markets with a quiet phone call, who dismantled competitors with surgical precision. Not a sledgehammer. His retribution against his wife and son would be conducted with the same cold, calculating efficiency. It would be a symphony of consequences, orchestrated by a master conductor. His first and most important move was to find Isabella. Chloe Davis's fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria was an unlikely setting for a meeting with a billionaire. When the buzzer rang, Chloe answered with her usual suspicion. "Who is it?" "My name is Richard Sterling." The voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. "I am Isabella's father-in-law. I would like to speak with her. I'm alone, and I come in peace." Chloe and Isabella exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look. Chloe's protective instincts flared. "Not a chance, buddy. You people have done enough." "Please," the voice said, and for the first time a note of something other than command crept in. It sounded like regret. "I know what my wife and son have done. I am here to make it right. For her, and for my grandchild." Isabella, who had been listening with a hand on her stomach, made a decision. "Let him in, Chloe." Chloe hesitated, then buzzed him up, standing by the door, with her arms crossed, ready for a fight. When Richard Sterling appeared at the doorway, he looked smaller than he did in photographs, and infinitely more tired. He wore a simple grey suit, no tie. He looked at the small, cluttered apartment, then at Isabella, who was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in Chloe's fleece blanket. His gaze was filled with a deep, unmistakable remorse. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't have the words to properly express how sorry I am for the actions of my family. What was done to you was monstrous and unforgivable." He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain away Genevieve's or Nathaniel's behavior. He owned it. "I have come here today for 2 reasons," he continued, remaining in the doorway, giving her space. "First, to offer you my sincerest apology, and second, to offer you my unconditional and absolute support in whatever form you choose to accept it." Isabella studied him. She had seen him as a distant, powerful figure, an extension of the cold Sterling Empire. Now she saw a man grappling with a profound failure within his own family. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why now?" "Because I just found out the truth," he said simply. "And because you are the mother of my grandchild. That makes you family. My family. And I do not abandon my family." Over the next hour, he laid out the facts. He told her what he had discovered, how he had confronted Nathaniel, and his intentions regarding Genevieve. He wasn't asking her to come back to the mansion or to forgive his son. He was offering her resources. "I have already opened a trust in your name and a separate one for the child. You will never have to worry about money again," he explained. "I have the best medical team on standby for you. I have located a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope that I would like to purchase for you and the baby, if you like it. And I have retained the services of the most formidable divorce attorney in New York City on your behalf. You will dictate the terms. Nathaniel will comply." Isabella was stunned into silence. This wasn't what she expected. She had been steeling herself for a fight, a long, ugly battle for legitimacy for her child. Instead, she was being handed an arsenal. "I don't want your money, Richard," she said, finding her voice. He nodded, understanding. "I know. This isn't about the money. It's about security. It's about justice, but I ask you to accept it, not as a handout, but as the first of many reparations that are owed to you. Use it to build a life for yourself and my grandchild, a life far away from the poison of my house." She looked at Chloe, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was real. This was power being handed back to her. "On one condition," Isabella said, her spine straightening. "This isn't just about me. Genevieve and Nathaniel can't just get away with a slap on the wrist. People need to know what they did. A grim smile touched Richard's lips. "I assure you their consequences are just beginning." He was true to his word. The very next day, the second phase of his plan went into effect: the financial and social annihilation. An internal memo at Sterling Global announced that Nathaniel Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons, effective immediately. His name was removed from the company letterhead. His corporate credit cards were declined at a 5-star restaurant where he was trying to have lunch with a stunned Victoria Vance. Humiliation was the opening salvo. For Genevieve, the attack was more subtle and far more devastating. Richard didn't need a tabloid. He had a more powerful weapon. He was a major benefactor to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Philharmonic, and a dozen other high society charities where Genevieve held prestigious board positions. He made a series of quiet calls. He didn't issue threats. He simply expressed his deep disappointment in his wife's recent ethical lapses, and suggested that her continued presence on these boards might compromise their integrity and, by extension, future Sterling donations. The effect was instantaneous. One by one, the calls came in. The chair of the museum board reluctantly accepted her resignation. The head of the Philharmonic Gala Committee suggested she might want to sit this season out. Her social circle, a fragile ecosystem built on power and proximity to wealth, evaporated overnight. Friends who had fawned over her for years suddenly didn't return her calls. She was being erased from the world she had so meticulously built. Isabella, meanwhile, was moving into the beautiful sun-drenched brownstone in Brooklyn. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a small garden in the back, perfect for a child. With the resources Richard had provided and Chloe's encouragement, she began to lay the groundwork for a small art consultancy firm specializing in private acquisitions. She was reclaiming her identity, not as Mrs. Sterling, but as Isabella Rossi. She had agreed to let Richard's lawyers handle the divorce. She didn't want a war. She wanted a swift, clean amputation. But she had made one thing clear to them: Nathaniel would have no automatic parental rights. He would have to earn them. Richard Sterling had not only given her a shield, he had handed her a sword, and as she stood in the empty room that would become her baby's nursery, feeling the first real kick from within, she knew she was ready to use it. The age of being a victim was over. The fallout was as swift as it was brutal. The world that Genevieve and Nathaniel Sterling had inhabited didn't crumble. It vanished like a mirage in the desert. Nathaniel's descent was the most pathetic. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and his father's approval, he was a ghost haunting the edges of a life he no longer owned. His fair-weather friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and laughed at his mediocre jokes, now looked right through him. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was just a man in a borrowed suit. The final predictable blow came from Victoria Vance. She had attached herself to the COO of Sterling Global, a man with a limitless trust fund and a direct line to one of the world's great fortunes. What she was left with was a suspended employee living in a company-owned apartment. She met him for one last drink at a bar in the West Village, far from their usual haunts. "I just think we need some space, Nate," she said, stirring her cocktail with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is all just so messy. I have my own reputation to consider." Reputation. Nathaniel scoffed a bitter, unfamiliar sound. "You mean your prospects? My father cut me off Victoria. The money's gone." Her mask of feigned sympathy dropped, replaced by a cold, appraising look. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her dress, "that is a shame. I hope you sort things out." She didn't look back as she walked out of the bar, leaving him alone with the bill. He wasn't sure he could pay. Her departure was the final confirmation of his irrelevance. He wasn't a person to her. He was a position, and the position was now vacant. Genevieve's isolation was more profound, a chilling portrait of poetic justice. She was trapped in the 30,000-square-foot Greenwich mansion, a queen reigning over an empty kingdom. The household staff, loyal to the man who signed their paychecks, treated her with a frigid, correct politeness that was more unnerving than open hostility. The silence in the vast hallways was deafening, broken only by the ticking of antique clocks counting down the moments of her gilded imprisonment. Her phone, once a constant source of invitations and gossip, remained silent. Her charities had disavowed her. Her social rivals whispered about her downfall with schadenfreude over lunch at St. Ambrose. They said she'd finally gone too far, that her cruelty had caught up with her. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of the sterling name and its accompanying social power. With Richard's support withdrawn, she discovered her identity was as hollow as a Faberge egg, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. The final confrontation with Richard took place in the very drawing room where she had condemned Isabella. He didn't come to argue. He came with his lawyer to deliver the terms of their separation. "You can keep the house," Richard said, his tone devoid of any emotion, "and I will provide you with an allowance sufficient to live comfortably. But you will be cut off from all sterling corporate assets. Your name will be removed from all family trusts. You will sign this post-nuptial agreement, which includes an ironclad non-disclosure clause regarding all family and business matters, or the allowance will be rescinded and I will sell the house." "You can't do this to me, Richard," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "After 40 years of marriage, I built this life with you." "No," Richard replied, his gaze unwavering. "I built an empire. You decorated it, and you allowed your vanity to threaten its future. You threatened my grandchild. That is a line you do not cross. This is not a negotiation, Genevieve. It is a statement of fact." He stood to leave. "The papers will be filed tomorrow. Your lawyers can speak to mine." As he walked away, Genevieve finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, and she let out a raw, guttural sob of rage and despair. She had played the game of social chess her entire life, and she had just been checkmated by the one piece on the board she always took for granted. While their world imploded, Isabella's was being built brick by brick on a new and solid foundation. The Park Slope brownstone was filled with light and life. Chloe was a constant supportive presence, helping her pick out furniture and paint colors for the nursery. Isabella's art advisory was no longer just an idea. It had a name, a business license, and its first client, a tech mogul Richard had discreetly referred to her. She was rediscovering the woman she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. She spent her days in museums and galleries, her mind sharp and engaged. The work gave her purpose, a sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with a famous last name. She met with her obstetrician regularly, no longer in the sterile, high-end clinic Genevieve had insisted upon, but with a warm, caring doctor in Brooklyn who spoke to her as a person, not a vessel for a dynasty. Her meetings with her divorce lawyer were brief and businesslike. She didn't ask for a punitive settlement. The trusts Richard had established were more than enough. Her only demands were non-negotiable, full legal and physical custody of her child. Nathaniel could petition for visitation rights after the birth, but they would be at her discretion and would be supervised until he could prove he was a stable and positive influence. It was not an act of revenge, but of protection. She was a mother bear guarding her cub. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting in the half-finished nursery and watching the leaves fall in her small garden, Isabella felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was free. The pain of Nathaniel's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in her heart. But it was no longer the defining feature of her existence. It was a scar, not an open wound. The symphony of consequences that Richard had orchestrated had provided a stark and satisfying justice, but her real victory wasn't their downfall. It was her own ascent. She was building a life of her own making for herself and for the child who would soon fill it with a new kind of music. Winter thawed into a vibrant New York spring. 6 months after she had walked out of the Sterling mansion into the pouring rain, Isabella Rossi walked out of a Brooklyn hospital into the brilliant sunshine, cradling her newborn son, Leo Rossi. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair like hers, and she thought with a pang she quickly dismissed his father's blue eyes. But his name was hers. He would be raised on her terms, defined by her strength, not by the tarnished legacy of his father's family. Waiting for her at the curb was not a chauffeur-driven limousine, but Richard Sterling himself, driving a discreet but comfortable SUV. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a light in them she had never seen before. When he saw Leo, his formidable composure melted away, replaced by the unabashed, foolish grin of a new grandfather. "He's a Sterling, all right," Richard said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched the baby's cheek. "He has that determined look." "He's a Rossi," Isabella corrected him gently but with a smile. "But I suppose he can have a little Sterling determination." Their relationship had transformed into something remarkable and unexpected. He was a constant, steady presence in her life. He never offered unsolicited advice, never overstepped. He was simply there, a source of quiet support, a guardian angel in a bespoke suit. He had become the father she never had, and in her and Leo, he had found a new purpose beyond the boardroom, a chance to build a family legacy based on love and respect, rather than power and fear. The divorce from Nathaniel was finalized with a quiet signature. There were no headlines, no messy court battles. Richard's power had ensured it. Nathaniel, humbled and forced into therapy by his father as a condition of receiving a modest living stipend, had begun the long, arduous process of self-reflection. A few weeks after Leo's birth, he called Isabella. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he said, his voice stripped of its old, easy arrogance. "But I was hoping. I would like to see my son." Isabella took a deep breath. "The first visit will be at my house. Your father will be here. You can stay for 1 hour. And, Nathaniel, this is not for you. It's for Leo. He deserves the chance to know his father, but he also deserves to be protected. You will have to earn his trust, and you will have to earn mine." It was a start. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a path forward. She would never allow the toxicity of the past to poison her son's future, but she also wouldn't let her own pain deny Leo a relationship with his father, should Nathaniel prove himself worthy of one. Genevieve Sterling remained a ghost in her Greenwich palace. The divorce had left her a wealthy woman, but a profoundly impoverished one. She was adrift in a sea of empty rooms and bitter regrets. The society she worshipped had exiled her, and her son, whom she had tried to control, now barely spoke to her, blaming her for his downfall. She had won her battle against Isabella, but in doing so had lost the entire war, sacrificing her son's happiness, her marriage, and her place in the world for the sake of a pride that now tasted like ash in her mouth. Life in the Park Slope brownstone was full. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and the scent of baby powder. Chloe was a fixture the proudest of aunts, showering Leo with books and affection. Richard visited every Sunday for what he called board meetings with the CEO, which consisted of him holding Leo and making quiet, happy noises. One sunny afternoon, Isabella was in the garden rocking Leo in her arms. Richard was there watching them with a peaceful expression. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "for decades I thought building a legacy was about steel and concrete stock prices and market share. I spent my life acquiring things." He looked at Leo sleeping soundly in Isabella's arms. "I was wrong. This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "this is a foundation. Everything else is just scaffolding." Isabella looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce protective love. The storm had passed. The ruins of her old life were far behind her. Here in this small garden, with her child in her arms and an unlikely ally by her side, she had not just survived. She had built something new, something stronger and more real than any gilded cage. A home, a family, a future, and it was all hers. That's the incredible journey of Isabella Rossi, a story that proves that true power isn't about wealth or a famous last name, but about resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She was cast out and betrayed, left with nothing, but she found her strength not in revenge, but in building a new life on her own terms. She turned a devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment and created a new kind of family founded on love and respect. What do you think about Richard's form of justice? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Genevieve and Nathaniel deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas where the truth always finds its way to the light. Thanks for listening.